Hi everyone, Tyler Manion here, NPC and IFBB Pro League Vice President, and this is going to be the Pittsburgh Pro Men's Open recap. Before I get into everything, I want to say what an incredible weekend, what an incredible show. The athletes showed up, brought absolutely incredible packages to the event, and of course this is the Open Men's Bodybuilding event, and I'm going to sit here and I want to first address, the claims of robbery, politics, and everything that everybody, wants to say from over the weekend. So obviously, I think the term robbery is used very loosely nowadays. It's used a lot in fighting, in boxing, in MMA. Of course, it's used in any sport that has judges. But I think a robbery is when really you think two people aren't that close to each other. And if you take all biases out of it and try to be as objective as possible, Nick and Derek were extremely close to each other this weekend. Each one has strengths and weaknesses that counteract the other. Okay, so robbery I don't think really applies here. Can you disagree with the decision and believe that Nick won? 100%. I mean, after I go into my recap, you can disagree with even the poses I'm going to give you because, in my opinion, 5 out of the 8 poses, you could argue for either one of them. I think only 3 poses were extremely clear for one person or the other. The other 5 were literally toss-ups. I can understand the argument for giving either person each of those poses. And when it comes to politics, let me talk to you about politics for a little bit. It doesn't make sense. Nick has the greatest fan support, in my opinion, of any open bodybuilder. Obviously, the storyline for the Olympia would have easily been made better if Nick just won the show. So this shows you that the judges are not caring about this. It's not on our minds when we're sitting at the table. We're trying to be as objectional as possible in a subjective sport that we're still looking at how each person fits the criteria. And both these guys fit the criteria in different ways. Now, let me give you guys an example of why politics also makes no sense. Last year at the New York Pro, Nick won a controversial decision. I was the head judge at that show. In my opinion, and I don't usually do this because I like to talk in more general terms when I'm doing breakdowns, so I don't say I voted for this person or I didn't vote for this person. In my opinion, Martin won the New York Pro last year. That's how I scored it. I'm the head judge. At the New York Pro, we have 5 judges. But, at the Arnold, the Olympia, and now the Pittsburgh, we have 9 to 11 judges on the panel. Highs and lows are dropped. This way, one person's opinion is not going to say, that's it. It's this person's opinion, and that's who wins the show. So somehow, if politics played a part, Nick won that controversial decision that me as the head judge of that show did not agree with. But obviously, on the panel, I was outvoted, 3 judges to 2. Nick wins that show. Now this weekend, I'll reveal right now, I'm one of the judges that favored Nick to barely win over Derek this weekend. But I can clearly see the argument of why Derek won the show as well. So I'm the vice president of the organization. This just shows you that I'm giving you 2 shows right now that I'm judging at. I'm right at the center of the panel, and the show ends up going the other way. So I feel like I'm going to address it again. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of negative comments, people disagreeing or whatever else. But at the end of the day, this is a sport that is judged by human beings. Okay, so people are not going to agree. We do the best that we can. And as the vice president, I do not always agree with the decisions that are made on the panel, but I always feel like there at least is an argument and it makes sense for why the other person won. So just getting that out there before we go into this, and hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of insight and understanding into, how close that was and how hard it is when the shows and the athletes are super, super close to each other. And again, I know a lot of people are unhappy, but I just think it's great that the fans are supporting our athletes in one way or another and care so much and are so passionate about the sport. So even though there's a lot of negativity to it, it still means that you guys care and you guys really support our athletes. So I can only say thank you for that. All right, so now let's get into the review of the contest. Again, I guess before we even do this, everybody saw that it was a tie score. Nick was winning at prejudging, Derek was winning at finals. Again, the score was 7-8. So Nick had 7, Derek had 8 after prejudging. Finals, that score was reversed to make it a tie score. They both had 15 points. And because of this, and because of how really major and big this show was, and it was a direct tie across the board, we wanted to bring them out for one more round, basically call it a tiebreaker round, to break this tie. And before I get into the poses, I feel like at this point, when we brought them back out, I can see why Derek took the victory, because I felt like he filled out and also was definitely tighter. The lines in his physique were deeper. And at this point, I thought Nick actually had flattened out just a little bit as well. And I'll go into detail with the poses and everything else. else, but I feel like these little small things are what gave Derek that separation that he needed. And again, you guys probably don't even understand, but these guys' bodies change so quickly. So, had that been maybe 15 minutes later, 15 minutes earlier, who knows how this ends up, because their bodies change that fast. But once we found out it was a tie score, we went backstage, we had the expediters tell them, gave them plenty of time to know that, after Classic Physique was over, that we would be bringing those two out alone first before any individual routine started for the open men. So they were prepared, they were ready, and honestly, the battle was unbelievable. As a judge, obviously, it was insanely hard to judge, but as a fan and then hearing the environment and also the fans, it was crazy. It was an amazing atmosphere. So again, props to both Nick and Derek. I mean, it was just awesome. So let's get into it. Front double bicep. I felt like this was one of the poses that was more clear for Derek. Now, in the front double bicep, obviously Nick has better arms. Nick has some of, if not the best arms, at least top 2 arms in the pro league. Now, get into the rest of the pose. Derek has wide flaring lats into a small waist. Nick's front double is the best I think it's looked. His waist definitely came in. It definitely came in from New York last year. I think it's the best it's been. Going to the lower body, and basically a weakness for both of these guys are their quads from the front, their leg width, how their quads look. Now for Nick, I think this was the best his quads have looked in his career. For me, for sure, I think they came up a little bit. I think the waist coming in a little bit also helps that illusion. For Derek, I felt like this was a middle of the road show for his legs. They were not as big and as full as they were at the Arnold. But when you're looking at these guys straight on, the amount of room that their legs take up is very similar, at least in my opinion. And when you go with the overall flow of this pose and the detail, I think Derek takes it. It's just a more pleasing pose because, again, Nick's waist just is still wider than Derek's. So when they're next to each other, I think Derek's able to overcome the lacking in the arms compared to Nick with his strengths in every other part of this pose. I think they both brought pretty good detail and separation to their quads too as well. Nick's gets a little bit blurry in the upper quad, but Derek also, his legs weren't as big and as full as the Arnold. So the lines I feel like weren't as deep as the Arnold. So everybody was expecting, what he brought to the Arnold. He didn't quite get that here, but we're just looking compared to Nick and Derek to each other on stage. So for me, this was a Derek pose to make it 1-0. The next pose is the front lat spread. Now, this was definitely for Derek his most clear win in a pose. Why is that? Because this is Nick's worst pose. Nick has definitely done a good job of trying to improve it, but still for him, his chest looks a little flat. The waist looks a little bit wide here. He's not really able to get the lats out in this pose the way that he's able to do it on the back lat spread. When you combine all this with his upper body, and then, his lower body obviously looked the best it did, but still the upper body and what he's lacking here really shows through. For Derek, this pose is becoming actually more of a strength for him. The lats are out. They're very wide. He's showing much better thickness in his chest. For Derek, his arms on the inside, like in the front double bicep, they lack detail, and obviously they don't have the peak of Nick and some others, but his outer arm detail and shoulders have improved a lot. If you look at this pose and really look at it, you won't really see that Derek's arms and shoulders are lacking compared to Nick's. I think they're very comparable. Then again, you go into the waist, the midsection. Derek's midsection is such a strength for him. Very small and it was tight. And then again, the lower body, I feel like there was still enough balance between his upper body to make this a clear pose for him. So right now, 2 poses to 0 for Derek. Now, we're going to move into the side chest pose. This pose, I feel like, was a very, very close pose. Again, we had went over before, Derek improved the way he's hit this pose a lot. His upper body, the width that he displays from shoulder to shoulder, his chest is much thicker. He even shows some striations now and some detail through that chest, which he was lacking before. Again, the waist is tight. I said the outer arm and shoulder for Derek actually shows detail and has become more of a strength for him when it used to be more of a weakness. Derek's side leg is always very, very good. You see the deep lines and separation in his side leg. However, again, I feel like we're comparing him to his best, which was the Arnold. I feel like still he was lacking, or he dropped just a little bit of that leg width from the side here. Now we go to Nick. Nick's arms and shoulders, of course, are great. His chest, I feel like he has improved, but that is a weaker spot for him. Derek has actually surpassed him, in my opinion, in the chest development part. Nick brings that back shoulder over just a little bit too much for me as well. He could display more width here because his shoulders are so wide. When he crunches over with that back arm, it takes away from some of his width. I mean, this pose obviously is very, very impressive for him, but he could still make this even more impressive. Nick, while he was in these poses, once he got settled in, his waist control was good. So his waist looked pretty solid here. And then Nick's side leg was really, really good at this show. Absolutely huge. Really, Derek normally has a side leg that's not only more conditioned, but bigger than every other person when he's going against them, other than a couple bodybuilders in the pro league. Nick is one of them. Nick's side leg was gigantic. Very good balance between the quads and the hamstrings. Good conditioning. Good lines. Not quite as many lines in separation as Derek, but the conditioning was still great. The lines that he does have were deep, and I thought this was a pose where Nick's muscularity really, really shined through. Now, like I said before, if you told me because of the reasons I just listed that you had Derek, I can see that. For me, the conditioning and just the muscularity, especially in that side leg, I thought was super impressive. And really, we posed him so much, I was going back and forth, but at the end of the day, I gave Nick this pose to make it 2 poses to 1. Next up is the back double bicep pose. I think this pose was the biggest surprise of the show, in my opinion. And why is that? Normally, when you turn to the back and you hit the 2 back poses, it's lights out for Derek against basically every competitor in the pro league. That was not the case at this show, in my opinion. Nick's back improved tremendously. If you even look at his past showings, Nick's always had a great back, but he does not have that depth and 3D look to it. Especially when you're close up to him, it's normally a little bit on the flatter side. That was not the case here. That depth and 3D look was brought by Nick. And is his back as deep and as thick as Derek's? No. But the back itself was very, very comparable. Now, let's go into the rest of the pose. The shoulders and the arms on Nick from the back might be even more impressive than they look from the front. I mean, absolutely cannonball delts. The biceps are perfectly peaked. The detail that he has in his arms is crazy. Derek was hitting this pose, I think, and not rotating his shoulders back enough. So while Derek's, again, outer arms and shoulders, I told you, are not as much of a weakness and actually turning into pretty good for him. In this pose, when the arms aren't rotated, the biceps look flatter than they normally are, and his shoulder development, while very good, is not quite the same as Nick's. Now going to the lower body, their conditioning was very, very similar. I really thought throughout, not only prejudging and in finals, it was going back and forth with how really tight each one was getting. I felt like at some points, I felt like Derek's lines were deeper. His conditioning was a little better than at some points. I felt like it was Nick's. Really, it was changing throughout how much we worked these guys. But Derek's conditioning was obviously very good in the lower body as well. His hamstrings are always stripped. The glutes are in. His leg width is pretty good, is normally solid, but this is one of the areas he can still work on, the leg width from the front and the back. And at this show, when you go over and you compare his leg width to Nick's legs looked massive from the back. His glutes are still in. While, again, the lines that Derek displays in the lower body are crazy. Almost nobody can match it. Nick, I thought, was close to matching those lines and that detail in the lower body as well. So not only did he have the size, he had the detail. Put everything that I just said together, and I feel like Nick beats Derek in the back double bicep at this show. His back was very, very comparable. His waist from the back in this pose looks so tiny. So how he hits this pose is incredible to me. Derek obviously has that small waist. His back is better, but the limbs is what sets Nick apart. And I feel like he barely loses in the back part, barely, seriously, at this show to Derek, and he beat him with every other part of this pose. So for me, I gave this pose to Nick to make it 2 poses to 2. Next up is the back lat spread pose. So obviously in the back lat spread, the arms are more taken out, right, than obviously the back double bicep. The arms are much more of a focal point in the back double bicep. So for me, I felt like this pose, again, was very, very close. At some points, I really thought I was going to give this pose to Nick, but at the end of the day, I ended up giving it to Derek just by a hair. And I think that's pretty crazy still because, as you can see from the videos and the pictures, Derek's back is insanely thick, insanely 3D looking, and he still, a lot of the times, was not opening it up all the way. Derek, when he opens up this back lat spread all the way, and he'll do it consistently, will be extremely tough for anybody to handle because you're looking basically, you have the rear delts of the shoulders, but other than that, you have that whole entire back and then the whole entire lower body. His back is so overwhelming when this pose is hit correctly that it's hard for anybody to match up against him. However, he wasn't opening up quite all the way, so that width, which is still crazy, could have been even crazier. For Nick, the back lat spread has improved a ton. Again, I feel like his waist looks so much smaller here from the back than it does from the front, and his lower body, like I just said, was absolutely incredible. Now when we're balancing back to legs here, I felt like for me that Nick's back still in this back lat spread still could have more of that depth and thickness. I think it displays much better in the back double than it does in the back lat spread. Derek's thickness and width in the back is really overwhelming. Again, I think Nick beat Derek in the lower body, but I feel like Derek here, his back was just a touch better than Nick's legs were better than his in the lower body. So for me, I gave Derek this pose by the slightest margin. Next up is the side tricep pose. Again, this is another pose that I think is super close between these two. For the side tricep, Derek's, again, outer arm and shoulder have improved. The way that he angles himself on this pose is much better. We see the detail to the midsection. The midsection is tight. The abs were in, even though they weren't as deep as the Arnold. The abs were still in. His chest stays fuller now in this side tricep pose as well. And again, the width that he displays across the top from shoulder to shoulder is very good. I feel like for me, it's very slight, but if you guys can see it, Derek's side leg was displayed better in his side tricep pose than actually it was in the side chest. So overall, the balance and the conditioning and the overall flow for this has turned into a really strong pose for Derek. Actually, the way he hits it and at the angle and everything else kind of reminds me of how Jay Cutler used to hit this side tricep. Now, obviously, Jay's side tricep was one of the best in history, but I think the angle and everything else, I think Derek had to have taken a look at that because this is kind of how he hits it, is kind of the way Jay hit it, and it's a very impressive pose for him now. For Nick, the side tricep is still a very good pose for him. However, I feel like the upper body, the angle of how he's hitting it could be better. We all know how good his arms and shoulders are, but I think flexibility-wise, he has a hard time angling that arm so it's more straight down. It looks like he has to reach really far back, so he's turning that arm over, so we really aren't getting the full impression of how crazy that side arm is going to be when that tricep's flexed and locked down. Obviously, it still looks great, but I think for Nick, if he can fix this, it's going to change this pose for him considerably. Nick's chest, again, I feel like Nick's chest has improved over the years, but again, I think looking at it between the two, it's a little bit on the flatter side compared to Derek's. And then midsection, his abs are in, his abs are deep, but his midsection is just thicker and he doesn't display the same flow going from head to toe. And again, Nick's side leg, again, was absolutely incredible. I feel like his side leg was bigger and a little bit better than Derek's. But when you're going top to bottom and overall in this pose, I gave this pose to Derek. I still think it's a toss-up pose. I can understand for these reasons I just explained if you think like that Nick would take this pose, but for me, Derek took this pose. So that makes it 4 poses to 2 right now for Derek. Next up is the abdominal and thigh pose. This is another pose that I thought was razor close between these two. And it's really because Nick's waist is just a little bit wider. In this pose, for some reason, Derek's able to make his legs look a little bit wider, a little bit bigger than he does in his other front poses. Obviously, Derek has really good taper, really good width that flows down, into a really small and tight waist. Now, Derek's abs were a little bit on the flatter side. The lines weren't as deep. When we go over to Nick, obviously, go from head to toe. Nick has the great arms over his head. I feel like Nick does a really good job of getting his lats out, though, to give him still very solid shape and width to go down into his waist. Nick's abs were very blocky in a good way, I should say. Nick's abs themselves were blocky and very deep with separation and detail. Again, legs from the front, I feel like they're very comparable, his and Derek's from the front. But I feel like here, that extra detail in his midsection really made this pose stick out. And he still has enough of that width and enough of that taper in the upper body. And actually, I think it's one of Nick's more balanced overall poses when you look at his upper body and lower body. And going back and forth between the two, I thought there was times when Derek was able to get that waist in. Whenever he did the one hand overhead and crunch down, you could see some more detail, not only in his abs, but also his chest and his quad. When he stayed straight overhead, actually, and went next to Nick, I felt like it was more of a clear pose for Nick. It wasn't quite as close, but when Derek switched over to the one hand overhead variation, I thought he made it a lot closer. But for me, just that extra added detail and conditioning made me give this pose to Nick to make it 4 poses to 3. Then last up was the most muscular pose. This is obviously Nick's strongest pose. His overall muscularity, absolutely insane. His chest still looks thick enough in this pose to complement the arms, the shoulders, the legs. He frames his body very, very good, so we're not seeing the whole waist. He frames it so we're seeing just his abs. I love actually how he frames himself on this pose. Shoulder to shoulder, very wide because his delts are crazy big, and his conditioning on this pose really shines through. Most muscular is probably Derek's weakest pose. So this is basically very similar to the front lat spread for me, when this is Nick's strongest pose and it's Derek's still weakest pose. Although I feel like it did improve. The chest is coming in, better. Obviously the outer arms and shoulders are better. His crab, it is better to hit than the hands on the hips that exposes too many gaps. And the legs, he's able to show detail when he flexes the quad out. You could see that separation and conditioning. But overall, Nick is just way, way too much to handle in this pose. Very few people can stand next to Nick in a most muscular. And this made it a clear pose for Nick. So ends up that is 4 poses to 4. And like I said, I feel like 5 poses you can argue either way for either competitor. So I know I've went over before what happens when I have the poses basically judged equally between 2 competitors. So I tend to look at the overall package, the overall polish, the overall details of a physique. And for me, when they were standing next to each other, I give the overall, I don't want to say details because in some poses, Derek is actually more detailed than Nick, but I want to say the overall polish of the package here, I want to give to Nick because his muscularity and size beat out Derek at this show. Some body parts were very, very impressive, even next to Derek, who has elite body parts. And really for me, it's just the overall package and how Nick displayed everything was very good for himself. And I gave the nod to Nick on my sheet. Now, one thing that I did not address yet, but definitely needs to be addressed, is for Nick. Nick did a good job of, once he was in the poses, controlling his midsection. However, in transitions and moving around and everything else, he still lets his midsection go a little too much. And again, we're judging every single second when these guys are on stage. When it's this close, we're looking for every single little flaw that we can find. And I know that for some judges, that was weighing in their decision on who's going to take this show. Derek is very, very good at always keeping a tight midsection at the show. You never see his stomach extend. You never see him breathing through his stomach. Everything's through the chest. The waist is always tight. As soon as he hits that stage, whether it's when he walks out to do an individual, whether he's waiting on a diagonal, he's always in check. Nick needs to get better at that. But again, this just shows you how close of a show this was. I think Nick announced himself into the 3-man race, basically, that has, jumbled up these last 3 years between Samson, Hadi, and Derek. Yes, this wasn't quite Derek's best version, but this was still a very, very good version of Derek. And in my opinion, Nick edged him out. But obviously, it was a tie score, then the tiebreaker got broken for Derek. I don't know if I explained it earlier in the video or not, but that tiebreaker, again, it was broken by 1 point, 1 judge. So it was literally a 1-point decision, as close as you can get. I don't know if I can remember a show being closer than this. And Nick showed that on any given day, he is in that same elite company as these top 3 guys from the past 3 years. And obviously he hasn't been able to be at the Olympia to show that, but his name is 100% in the mix. And he is a major threat to be one of the guys to try to take that title from Samson. In 3rd place, we had Martin. For prejudging, Martin came out at first in the groups, I should say, and looked like he was pretty on point, but he came out for his individual, and then as soon as we started the comparisons, he kind of started sweating and fading, and for him, prejudging just wasn't his best showing. I know he knows that. For finals, I thought he came back way more polished. I thought his conditioning was deeper and better, and I thought his finals look was very, very impressive. So really good job of recovering from what I know for him was a disappointing prejudging. I know he wanted to be in there with those top 2 guys to make it a 3-man call out, and I think for him it was a win with that finals showing because he's going to improve from that, and I feel like by the end of this year and by the Olympia, he can bring something that, how I mentioned before with Nick joining those top 3 guys from the past 3 years, I feel like Martin has the possibility of taking that step by the end of the year as well. So when I look at Martin, obviously he's very balanced, very proportional, has great size. I think he put on a little bit of size from last year. There's just a couple of things that he needs to work on to really separate himself from everybody that he placed ahead of last year at the Olympia and put himself firmly in with those guys that are a little bit ahead of him right now. The first pose that he needs to fix is the front lat spread. He needs to work on still showing more of those lats when he's in the front lat spread. His lats do not really come out all the way to give that width. His left side never comes out quite as much as his right side. So I think it's more of a flexibility issue still. I know he does a lot of work and he's been doing a lot of work to get that done. Again, the front lat spread is only getting better, but it's still something that he needs to work on, because once he does this, it's going to show off like he has a great waist, a small waist. His legs look great. His detail in his midsection looks great. His outer arms and shoulders in this pose look pretty solid. He could still use a little bit more chest thickness as well, especially seeing the upper chest. So upper chest thickness here and then getting those lats out all the way is going to really help him. In the side chest pose, Martin has a great side chest. Obviously, his legs from the side are crazy. I feel like his chest could still improve a little bit more with the thickness. And for me, when you compare it to his side tricep, his outer arms and shoulders could still use a little bit more detail in this pose. So again, just little tweaks here, and he's going to have a heck of a side chest that can stand next to anybody. Next pose is the back double bicep. For here, he still just needs a little bit more of that width in this pose. He hits it a lot better, I feel like, than he has in the past. I feel like he's opening up better for sure. He doesn't squeeze as much. But again, when you look at the back thickness here, Martin has great back thickness, but when you look at Derek's back double and Nick's back double, and even still, who I'll get into next, William's back double, that 3D look, he just needs to continue to work on that, and he's definitely on the right track, but that's something he can improve in the back double. And then the back lat spread pose, he can also improve as well. Again, it's just making sure he's able to get those lats all the way out, adding a little bit more width, and again, more that thickness for that 3D look is really going to improve this pose for him. His other poses, I feel like, are very, very strong. He has a great front double now, great taper, good balance between the upper and the lower. His arms have improved, especially his inner arms. The detail there has improved. His side tricep pose is really, really solid. His abs have great detail to them. His waist looks tight. The overall flow, again, looks really, really good between his upper and his lower body. I said his outer arm and shoulder in this pose look much more detailed and I think are much more impressive than they are in the side chest pose. His ab and thigh is one of the best. I feel like when he does that and he gets that ab detail in, you see how small his waist is. You see how big his quads are, how much sweep that he has. He has really good taper and width in this pose. And as he's working on getting those lats wider for the two lat spread poses, this pose is only going to continue to get much better because he's done a great job of continuing to keep that waistline in check and the detail in his midsection. And then finally, Martin's most muscular pose, I feel like, in my opinion, is one of the strongest, most muscular poses in the league. It can stand with anybody, including Nick in his most muscular, even when he's at his best. His crab is absolutely crazy. The detail that comes out in his outer arms and shoulders. His chest detail in this pose is great. His midsection looks great and detailed, and his legs are absolutely crazy. He flexes that quad, and you see the cross striations and the separation in his quad. So a lot of super strong poses for him. A lot of poses that can hang right in there with those top guys, beat the top guys in some of these poses. It's bringing up those weak points to really round out this physique. And again, he's the youngest of these top competitors. So it's just awesome to watch him continue to improve, and he's a student of the game, so I know he's going to bring better and better every single show. Last up, in fourth place, was William Bonac, who just has been impressing me so much since he came back last year. He has gotten better at every single show he's done. He has continued to bring his waistline in. He's continued to work on that width to his lats to give himself a little bit better of a taper. Somehow his legs, especially his quads from the front, have come up considerably. Not just from last year. I feel like throughout his career, his quads have never looked bigger and better than from the front. His conditioning is always great. I felt like he brought a really, really good balance of conditioning and fullness to this show. And, you know, some of his poses, the back double bicep, even though he doesn't have the widest back, the depth and 3D look to it are so crazy. It's still so impressive. His side chest, absolutely great. His hamstring drops more. He just has some really, really impressive poses. His most muscular, he hits a crab. I thought him and Martin hitting the crab most musculars together was awesome. You see the detail and the thickness and the 3D look that both of them bring in that pose. They have some of the best crab most musculars in the entire league. So for William, being as old as he is, I mean, and continuing to improve is absolutely amazing. And again, he's like improving, like from the Arnold to Detroit to here. I felt like from what I've seen, he's improved at every show. So he's just going to show bodybuilders that you can compete, and you can compete a good bit, and you can continue to make improvements as your season goes on. You know, you don't always have to take a long off season or go into off season. He's showing that, you know, his body, he's just continuing to improve, and age is just a number. So again, appreciate all these guys for coming out. All in all, super exciting show, and I just want to give props to the entire rest of the lineup because they looked absolutely incredible, and I'm just so happy that they decided to participate at this show. And a show like this is what truly does grow the sport of bodybuilding.